Hey everyone, my name is Rahul and in this video we will be starting with the GraphQL series. Now, the videos in this series, I'll be going through certain GraphQL tests that you can perform in your GraphQL assessments and even use them while playing CTF competitions. Now, this does require some general knowledge about GraphQL, which I'll be giving you along the way. But if you need to find out the differences between regular APIs and GraphQL, you might want to take a look at the resources that I'll be putting down in the comment section or the description section for that matter. Okay, so GraphQL first of all is not an API. It helps you interact with the database and the application, but it is in no way called an API. So with that, let's just look through the application and see how we can figure out if this is a GraphQL application. Now this is quite simple. We have burp turned on and let's create a paste. Hello, hello, okay, and 1. If I click on the submit button, you will see that the endpoint is GraphQL. Now this should be the first hint as to what type of an application this is. Now you have the GraphQL / GraphQLi and things like this point out that this is a GraphQL endpoint, but different vendors or software developers might rename this endpoint based on their use case. But here we have the GraphQL endpoint, and as you can see, there is a query being sent. So we'll talk about this later on, but for right now, let's just send it to repeater. All right, so we are done with this. Now, supposedly, all you have is a URL endpoint, right? So how do you kind of fingerprint as to if this is actually a GraphQL endpoint or not? So for that, I have a resource. That resource is called GraphWoof. So what I have done is I have downloaded GraphWoof, and what I'll be doing here is I'll be trying to fingerprint the actual GraphQL engine. Because just like you have different servers, for example, you might have Nginx, then you might have Apache. Similarly, there are different engines in GraphQL. So this will help you figure out what engine it is using. Because if you know the engine, you might actually find some vulnerabilities specific to that engine that might help you out. So what I have done is I've cloned GraphWoof. I'm using Python 3 main.py, and here is the target. Hit enter. Here, as you can see, it has actually found out the GraphQL endpoint, which is this, and as well as the engine, which is graphene. Now with that kept aside, this was the first test case that you can perform whether fingerprinting is possible. Now secondly, if we go back to the repeater tab, we had something here called a query. Now when it comes to API endpoints, you might have heard the term CRUD, which stands for create, read, update and delete. So you might be performing put operations, post operations or get operations. But with GraphQL, you see that there is only one type of method, which is the post method. Now we'll come to that, how we can modify this. But for now, for most of the use cases, what you will find out is that the method is always post and having the same endpoint. Now, if there are multiple schemas, and I'll tell you what a schema is. If an application has multiple schemas, it might also have multiple different endpoints. So there are two type of operations when it comes to GraphQL. The first is mutation operation, and what mutation operation does is it is similar to update operation. So through mutation, what you are trying to do is you are trying to create new entries or modifying existing entries or kind of deleting those entries. So this is called the mutation operation. Now the second operation is called the query operation, and I'll show you what that query operation looks like. So if I go to public pastes and if I go to proxy, here is the actual request. Now this is called the query operation. If I send it, you will see that all I get is the data back. So there are two type of operations that we just talked about. The first is mutation, second is query. Now there's a third one called subscription, but we don't want to get into that. So most of the times what you'll be finding out is that it is either query or mutation. Now there is something special when it comes to GraphQL. Now GraphQL by default allows you to find out the entire schema. Now what is schema? Consider it a set of fields or operations that you can perform through GraphQL. Now by default, you can look at that schema, and this brings us to the next test case. Now here is the introspection query that you can use. Now this particular test case is called introspection, and all you have to do is remove everything except for query, because this is actually a query operation. Paste it and send it. Now this is the entire schema. it has mutations, it has query, and it also has subscriptions that we just talked about. Now here you will find out the name of the operations, what values do these operations accept, and even some hidden operations that might not be visible to the user from the UI endpoint. Now here we see that so there was a mutation operation with the name of create paste, and now this is just a name, you can kind of forget it. Now one more thing that is specific to the Burp Suite recent versions is that you get a GraphQL tab. Now if you go here, there is something called create paste. Now you can forget this thing and just focus on this part because this is just a name, you can rename it to anything that you want. Now if I copy this and paste it over here, you might find out that this is a mutation operation with the name of create paste, and it has a few arguments that it accepts like content, burn, and if you see, those same arguments exist here. Now through introspection you might be able to find out the exact operations and the arguments that they accept. Now if I copy this entire part out and if I go to GraphQL Voyager, here it is. Hopefully it loads. Introspection, paste it over here. Now this will save you a lot of time because you don't want to go through the response every time. So if I click on display, you will see that here are all the operations that exist. Now there is something called paste, there's something called system update, users, search, audits, delete all pastes, and me. This is something that will help you out when the introspection query is enabled. So this was the other test case. Now let's try something different. The third test case. Now here you have a query operation with get pastes. Now let's go to GraphQL tab, and if I type in id1, you will see that it says id1 on type paste object cannot find it. So did you mean id? Now this is something called suggestions. Now this helps you brute force in a much easier fashion, because if I had nothing but if I knew the name of the operation and if I wanted to find out the name of the arguments that it accepts, what I can do is I can just type it, and here you will see that it does not exist. Did you mean id? So this was the third test case that you can perform. In the upcoming videos, I'll be going through other test cases as well, which are really interesting and can lead to denial of service attacks. And I'll also be showing you how you can perform XSS, NoSQL, SQL, and command injection, or even SSRF through GraphQL based on the application that is sitting behind it. So stay tuned. Thank you.